Use of data and AI was one of the impact areas of the Biotech Act, which was discussed. So I'm sure our next speaker, Marta Carrasco, can put some color on how data can be used for study design and clinical development decision-making.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? So it's a pleasure of being here today. So my name is Marta Carrasco. I'm a Biomedical Data Insights Leader in PD Data Science and Analytics. And today, the spin I'm going to give to my talk is how data reuse can help us innovate. And because of the theme of this conference, I'm going to be focusing specifically on how data reuse can help us innovate in study design. And I'm also going to give a bit of a flavor as well on how it can help us in clinical development programs as well. So I'm going to start focusing on why do we want to do secondary use of data or data reuse. It's interchangeable concepts. How we've been doing this in Roche in the last few years. I'm going to talk a bit about the EDIS program. Then I'm also going to spend some time explaining what are these multimodal data assets that we use, but I'm not going to go that technical, don't worry. I'm going to keep it at a very high level. And I'm also going to give an overview of what's the data mart portfolio that we have at the moment. And to end up my presentation, I'm going to give some specific examples of how the analyses that have been done using these multimodal data assets have helped us inform decisions that have a direct impact on our R&D portfolio. And this is why we do everything we do. This is everything, we do everything for our patients. And I know we all work in the world of clinical trials, but until you have been a patient in a clinical trial yourself, or you have had somebody very close to you going through a clinical trial, you don't realize the courage, the effort, the commitment that it takes, going to all these hospital visits, getting all these samples, taking these medicines, all these assessments. So it takes a lot, I mean, both from us in the industry, but especially from our patients. And if it wasn't for our patients in our trials, we would not be able to run these trials. So I think we have an obligation to do as much as we can with the data that we gather in our clinical trials. And it's not only to end up using this data to create a CSR, a dossier, to get the drug into the market. We have to do much more with this data, and we can. We can use this data for, this is going to be the objective later of my talk later today. We have to make the most of reusing this data, so it's not just for a specific submission to health authorities, but it can also be used to develop new drugs, to inform our clinical design of our clinical studies, et cetera, et cetera. And the way that we focused this about 5 or 6 years ago in Roche, we started a program that was called EDIS, Enhanced Data and Insights Sharing. The focus of this program was to make sure that the data would be fair, that the data was findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, so we could keep reusing and sharing this data. Because as this slide shows, as an industry, we had been really good at generating and managing data for the study endpoints, like procuring samples, running samples, writing tables, et cetera, But we, as an industry, in the past, we had not been really good at thinking on how we're going to prepare this data, store this data, so in a few years later, this data then can be reused to run and generate, to run some analysis and generate additional insights. So as you can see in the slide, there is all this cataloging, these standards, et cetera. This somehow tends to get into the way when we are setting clinical trials and we want to go fast. And we had always put that aside and just focus on the trial we were running, and that was it. But this had to change if we wanted to make sure that this data could be reused, and specifically integrating data from different studies. And this is a slide that summarizes what the EDIS program was about. As I've mentioned, is making sure that we make data fair, that we can share this data, And this is, I would say, when you look at, we do R&D research and then we run our clinical trials. This is the normal process that we always have followed so far. But then the focus of EDIS was making sure that we could go from our clinical trial data back to use this data for R&D research and development. And this is what we in-house started calling reverse translation, because it was, let's say, it was going the opposite direction that we had gone in the past years. And again, as I said, the main focus is making data fair, making sure that we can share this data. And to do this, we have, I mean, it is, but the way this program had 3 areas of focus. One was systems. Somebody mentioned before that we have all these systems that are disconnected, don't follow the data pipeline. So there was a big effort in building this end-to-end engine that we called, which was making sure that we had all the systems talk to each other and was as, let's say, not as complex as possible. Then there was the part of processes. The most important part, though, was people, trying to understand people why this project, why this program was important and what would be the outcomes of it. And one of the ways we did that was using use cases that helped us build the engine, helped us improve the processes, and they also helped us somehow convince our Roche colleagues on why it was worth it, focusing on making data fair, even though it could slow you down at the beginning a little bit, but then in the future, that would really pay dividends, having the data in formats, in systems, et cetera, that would make it much easier to reuse it. And the use cases we focused working on were what we called data marts or multimodal data assets. So we started creating these, I would say, think about big data cubes, but we call them multimodal data assets because they include different types of data, different modalities. So obviously, as a pharmaceutical company, we have lots of clinical data that has been used for health authority submissions. But then we have a lot of high-dimensional data that we gather during our clinical trials. It might not be used specifically for the submissions, but it's being used for exploratory purposes, like think about biomarker analysis. Why do we have these patients that respond better to some drugs than others? So we have a lot of this data. So one of the things we're doing in these data marts is connecting all the data that we gather during our clinical, during the execution of the clinical trials with this exploratory data that might have, that is not part of the ECRF, for example. And then also we have some of the data marts that also include real-world evidence, real-world data. Think about patient repositories, et cetera, et cetera. So the power of these data marts is that you don't have one study. We have data marts that have maybe up to 40 or 50 studies. So imagine the power of all this data coming together. You have different types of data. Again, for a patient, you have the clinical outcomes, but you have also the exploratory. Then it's complemented by some external data as well with different patient profiles as well. And what makes these multimodal data assets so powerful as well is that the data is harmonized. It's interoperable. So it's not just pulling the data together and let's see what happens. So we have very talented data engineers that do a fantastic work of defining key variables across all these different studies, and they prepare this data then so it's much easier for our analysts to perform different types of analysis. I'm going to skip this one because we're also changing the way we build our multimodal data assets now, but if you have any specific technical questions afterwards, come to me on one of the breaks, and I'm going to be super happy to explain the nitty-gritty details of how we build these data assets. But I wanted to spend a bit more time also to give you an overview of when I talk about data marts and multimodal data assets, which types of data assets do we have. So at the moment, we have 22 data marts that are published. When I say published, it's that we have them in a system called, at the moment, the Clinical Data Sharing Environment. This is going to change pretty soon. And this is accessible to all the Roche employees. I mean, with some privacy exceptions depending on if they are ongoing studies in the data marts or if there are partnerships with other pharma companies, or you know that the privacy landscape is changing, so depending on where you sit, you cannot access data from some specific patient, so all these restrictions, all that is embedded in there. But this data is available. From the 22 data marts you see here, not all of them are in active development at the moment, so some of them were built in the past, but obviously they are available for our analysts to work with them. You can see as well that they cover a wide range of therapeutic areas. So we have oncology, both hematology and solid tumors. There's neurology, there's inflammation, ophthalmology. So it's a quite varied portfolio that we are making sure that it aligns with the Roche One Pharma strategy as well in the portfolio focus. And it always keeps changing. I mean, depending on the needs of the teams, we focus more now, we're going to work on this data mart because they need this data, because they are expecting this data, because it needs to inform the design of a protocol, or it has to inform, there's going to be a PIP-GO decision, a phase 3 investment decision. It would be great if they could have this additional data to support the analysis they are making. So it always changes the focus with the specific multimodal data assets that we're working on. And what we do in our team in data curation and integration, so we build this data. So this is the foundation then for our analysts to work on this data. It can be more traditional analysis work. It can be, obviously, now everything is about AI, but you always have to remember that AI is super powerful, but you really need a good data foundation for it to be successful. So this is how we see our team being part of this this new wave of analysis work, but it's making sure that we provide and we prepare the right data for our analysts so they can really get into use it on the different ways they think it's better. And we build these data assets. Our analysts work on, they perform some analysis, and they generate some insights. But the part that is what we're always looking forward is that how do we use these insights? Because it's not just doing science for the sake of doing science. We really want to make sure that we generate these insights, but they have some applications. So we've had in the last few years with different insights that have been generated using these multimodal data assets that I was mentioning, we've had really good examples of identifying new indications where we should be focusing, for example, for specific molecule, or identifying new targets. There's been a fantastic partnership between pharma and DIA to develop new diagnostic tests, which would be this part in the scientific innovation and the new commercial opportunities. But there has been a lot, many of our insights have been informing the design of our studies. And not only the design of our studies, but also as well the design of clinical development programs. And the impact that this has, it's the 4 items I've put in the bottom, is like we aim to reduce patient burden. We want to make sure that we accelerate timelines as much as possible. We want to reduce costs. And basically, we also want to increase the PTS of our studies. And this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to show you some specific examples of how some analyses have been, and the insights generated have been informing some of these studies and some of these specific examples. I'm not going to go into all details of the analysis, et cetera, because that could be a full day presentation. But I'm just going to keep it super high level to give you an idea of how the data is used. And then if you have any questions, you can come to me at one of the breaks. So specifically for study design, I've picked 4 examples. I mean, we had many more, but I just picked these 4 today, and I'm going to go into more details into one of them, and the last one. But we have used the insights that have been generated from our multimodal data assets. Basically, for example, on some of our autism trials to really define which are the primary and secondary endpoints that we wanted to use for these very specific trials that we were running. And then, for example, the second one, using our NHL, the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma data mart, we used also the insights generated around ctDNA analysis allowed us to stratify the different patients based on risk. So this also helped the design of the study, and this discussed also some mitigation strategies based on where the patients would fall. And we have also used our data marts to support discussions with health authorities. It's not submissions, I'm talking about discussions, Q&A. We had a really good example with the Afimkibart for IBD. The FDA were concerned about this was about all study design. FDA were concerned about some of the dropout rates, especially on the placebo population, and they wanted us to make some modifications to the studies, et cetera, but we were able to prove using we have a really big IBD data mart showing historical data. It was like, we have mostly the same dropout rates, both in placebo and on the drug, so they were happy with that. We agreed to apply some mitigation strategies, but in the end, it saved us having to make too many different changes into our protocol. And the one I would like to take a little bit more time to discuss, it was for one of our Alzheimer's studies. This is from a few years ago. One of the inclusion criteria for our patients in these studies was amyloid positivity. And one of the ways to assess that for our patients, you can either do some very specific PET scans, which is already not very comfortable, it's also costly, takes time, but then another way of determining that is through the concentrations of amyloid protein in the cerebrospinal fluid. And as you can imagine, getting a sample of CSF, it's not the most comfortable experience for any of our patients. So what the Alzheimer data mart team did, and this was a fantastic collaboration between pharma and DIA, so they looked into they wanted to do, and they did, they identified biomarkers that could be assessed into a blood test, and that was used as a pre-screening tool to enrich the patient population that then you would be screening. I mean, in the end, patients still had to go through the screening, either through a PET scan or a CSF puncture, but we reduced the amount of patients that had to go through this hurdle. And what you can see, this is a summary of what I just explained. So the main screening still happens, but when we do this pre-screening for these blood-based biomarkers, I mean, in the regular population, you expect a 50% of amyloid positivity, but doing this enrichment at the very beginning, the expected percentage increased by more than 10%. So this is savings in time, savings in money, but most importantly, we saved some people having to go through the main screening that in the end would have ended up maybe not being that positive. So these are some details on how they did that. I still have a couple of minutes, but I see Ernst looking at me, so I'm going to go super quick. Other examples of insights, we use these insights also to support study go, no-go decisions. And we've had some examples of in terms of not progressing studies, either if they were new or ongoing. But then on the other way around, some analyses that have been done using our data marts have triggered the decision of, oh, let's start this new study because what we are seeing, this is very interesting. And one example of this is using the cancer immunotherapy data mart. There were some very specific algorithms developed to understand the immune fitness of the patients that seemed to be super relevant. So then there was a decision to fund additional studies to make sure that we could already get deeper into that. And that's the last one. So for clinical development design, this is at a higher level than specific study design, these data marts, we have also been using it in due diligence processes. When our colleagues in partnering want to in-license some molecules, I mean, we have our statisticians working with them to try to prove or rebate some of the claims that are being done for the assets. So the data marts we have proven to be a really good data source to support these discussions. And yeah, I'm going to leave it here. And just to make sure that support what Luca said before, we always end up our presentation saying, doing now with patients next, because this is why we do what we do.
Thank you, Marta.